Andrew, welcome to UTS.
Thank you, Helen.
Congratulations on your Gold Walkley. So this is 6 Walkleys and lots of other awards and a great, very impressive body of work. Congratulations. I want to start by having a look at a video of you at work. So let's have a look at this. So Andrew, tell us, where is this? Where are you? What is happening?
This is in the northern Afghan city of Kunduz. I was there with a colleague who's got a GoPro mounted on his helmet. I'm on there in the blue jacket. And we were there about a week after the Taliban overran the city. It was the first time they'd done that since 2001. And in the attempt to take back the city, the Afghan troops, with the help of American aeroplanes and special forces, were fighting around the outskirts to get into the city. About a week before this, I should say, was when the American aircraft bombed the MSF hospital, killing more than 40 people inside the hospital. And this was a few hours before I managed to get into the city and to get into the hospital. So this was part of a kind of week-long attempt to get to the hospital.
So you actually embedded here with the Afghan military?
With the Afghan army, yeah.
Okay. So what's it like being there? I mean, we're looking at here from the comfort of Sydney. What does it feel like being there?
It's, an intense situation, obviously. There's a lot of adrenaline. As a photographer, it's an incredibly, compelling subject, to be with these guys in that moments of such intensity, and particularly, where they're also very much unaware of, or less aware of my presence and my colleagues, and you really get that sense that all photographers aspire to, and take on that, fly on the wall perspective, and thrown in amongst it all is this intensity that I keep referring to.
But you're so close. I mean, you are shooting them shooting. And we see you, you're so close. Does it get, they're happy to have you there, and do you feel like you're in the way, or do you feel that you could also be a stray bullet?
Well, yeah, of course, that's the risk, but I'm being a lot more careful than most of these soldiers are, a lot of them aren't even wearing their helmets or their armour, and they're standing around kind of head nearly above the wall there, and I think I'm probably a lot more risk averse than most of these guys are. But yeah, the question about my presence there, like most people, people love having their pictures taken, and especially these guys who are, for the most part forgotten, not only by their own country, but certainly by the rest of the world. And to have a couple of, Western, foreign white journalists there who think they're important enough to be hanging out with in these circumstances is, I think, for the most part, they really appreciate it, and it's kind of fun for them and a bit of a novelty, and often it distracts them from what they're meant to be doing, unfortunately. But no, I think they like it.
Ironically, is this the safest way to cover this sort of event? Can you just get into your car with your cameras and go out and drive around
in this
shooting?
In this instance, this is really the only way. If you're going into especially me as a foreigner, I'm a much kind of, I hate to say it, a more valuable target being a Westerner who, have a higher price on his head than an Afghan journalist. No one's going to pay a ransom for some local Kunduzi journalist who's been kidnapped. But so in this instance, yeah, it's the only way to somewhat safely get to where we needed to get. Yeah.
So you moved to Afghanistan in 2013.
Mm-hmm.
You had a very comfortable job with Fairfax.
Mm-hmm.
Why did you do it?
I was curious. I mean, I think like anyone who goes to a place like this, I was just curious, and I also, I think, probably wanted to test my own mettle a bit. And so I went with a colleague who I worked with at Fairfax, and we only planned to stay, a week or two, and we ended up spinning that out for weeks and then months, and then after 3 months, after all our visa extensions had expired, I remember, flying out of Kabul and over this, spectacular landscape and feeling sort of overly nostalgic after 3 months, and knowing that I wanted to go back.
So how do you live in Afghanistan? Where do you live? What do you do every day? How do you get the jobs?
Living, I'm in a private residential home on a residential street in like quite a middle class neighbourhood where there's a lot of other international NGOs have offices there. But from the street, I mean, we just look like any other Afghan house. In terms of security, we kind of follow the theory of going low profile rather than armouring everything up and drawing attention to ourselves in that sense. So we try to stay under the radar and draw as little attention to ourselves as we can. I live with another journalist and his wife, who's now working for the UN, also used to be a journalist, and a couple. We have rotating guests coming through, and it's very. I mean, I quite like the lifestyle there. It's very simple, and we have. I mean, there's no bars or restaurants really to go to at night, but there's a good small tight-knit community there that we, congregate together and have, it's sort of more dinner parties than nightclubs and things, which suits me.
Sounds nice, but while we were getting ready, you had a message that really breaks the, the very calm picture that you've painted for us. Tell us about that.
Do you want me to read it?
You can read it, yep.
This was just from a friend who is like a high-ranking UN official, and he got this security warning that he thought me and my housemates might be interested in. Taliban plan to conduct a suicide attack against a guest house used by foreigners in Police District 10 area of Kabul city. Insurgents intend to move 4 suicide attackers to Kabul city for familiarisation with the area. The 4 will later receive suicide vests from the Taliban facilitator in Kabul city at an unknown time, date, location. Hope you're staying warm.
Well, you're very warm here. Now, what does that make you think about?
Well,
first of all, your security.
To be honest, we hear those all the time, and so rather than react specifically to that and either leave the country or hunker down, we just just more mindful of it in our routines and our security protocols and things. So that's.
But as a freelancer, who looks after you? Who pays? I mean, insurance or security. You get a lot of journalists coming in with their own security they've paid for, which is very, very expensive, and they are insured. Who protects you?
Well, it depends who I'm working for at the time. I can't afford to have insurance the whole time I'm there. It's exorbitantly expensive. I get insurance when I leave Kabul to go out into the provinces on a sort of day-to-day basis. But in Kabul, no one really. I mean, the embassy wishes we weren't there. I mean, if I ever write to the embassy and say, I've heard about this threat, can you give us any information? They'll send me a link to the website, which is run out of Canberra, and says,
Don't go.
well, it actually says, don't travel to Afghanistan. And then further down it says, and don't stay away from the airport. So I'm stuck.
So don't work, in other words.
Yeah.
What is your biggest fear being out there and working? Apart from being killed.
Apart from having mum in the audience.
Sorry, Mum.
Kidnap, obviously.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so knowing that, do you then choose who you're working for because you know the French will pay ransoms and the Americans won't? I mean, is that something that enters your mind?
No, it's more your citizenship. Yeah. So it doesn't matter who you're working for.
Right.
And I think, I mean, America and Australia would hate for me to say this, but everyone pays at the end of the day.
Really? So the Australians and the Americans do
it's
still
not
pay?
publicised, but I think, I mean, they always conjure a story like, somehow miraculously X escaped a Taliban prison in the middle of the night and found his way to Afghan soldiers, down the road. It's like, well, yeah.
So, Andrew, when you're there, do you see a lot of the big media corporations coming in, like the 60 Minutes flying in, and or do you find that most of these organisations are outsourcing the danger to you?
Well, it's kind of a blessing and a curse because while obviously I want the work, sometimes you feel like you're expendable. So I know, for example, ABC are very reluctant to send their own journalists into a place like Afghanistan. So they'll...
Is that because of the cost of insurance, do you think, or people don't want to go there?
No, it's because of the cost. I think there's plenty of people who would like to go, but it's the weighing up the risk. And I think now that so much interest has left Afghanistan, it's hard for most media organisations to justify that risk for what's not as important a story as it once was.
Well, let's have a look at the iconic image that you took. Tell us, who is this person, who was this person, and what was happening? I mean, what were they being operated on? What do you know about what happened?
He was he's 42 years old, Nazar, Mohammed Nazar was his name. He's married with 4 young children. He worked as like an unarmed guard at a local bazaar, and during the week that the fighting that you were just seeing before was happening, early on in that week he went to the stores that he guards just to check on them. He'd heard there'd been some looting, so he went there early in the morning one day, and he got there and the Taliban had that area under control, and they said it's too dangerous, like, get out of here, go home. So he left, and on his way home, he and a friend of his, another guard, were just caught in crossfire, and he was shot in the leg. You can see what's called an X-fix brace on his right knee there. And so he was in the MSF hospital, undergoing his second operation on that injury, just to have the wound sewn up, and he would have spent another day in hospital, and then he would have been released. He was being operated on at 2 a.m. in the morning. At this point, the night the attack happened, the staff at the hospital were pretty much working 24 hours a day. So they had a list of operations to conduct that night, and he was about halfway through that list. And there were about 4 staff in the room when the attack happened. They'd just put him under. I don't know if anaesthetic's the right word, but he was...
Sedated?
Sedated, yeah. So he was, yeah. So he was a heavy-set guy, and he's strapped in. And when the bombing happened, everyone's instinct was to run and seek shelter themselves, which is, I mean, a lot of these staff have a lot of guilt about leaving it, but I certainly know from a paramedic perspective that they very much followed the protocols of look after yourself first and foremost. And had they not run, I mean, several others of them would have been killed as well. I mean, he obviously he didn't feel anything because he was under, but there was really just one shell that penetrated this operating theatre, which you can't see in this photo, but there's a perfectly round hole in the ceiling above where I'm standing, and I didn't know it at the time, but apparently the way they work is they penetrate the exterior of the building and then they detonate a split second after. So it goes in and then that's why there's all these fragments out of the room, and one of the fragments took off the top half of his head.
Oh. Yeah. So you heard about the bombing and you had to go and cover the story. Let's take it from there. How did you get to take this photograph?
So I was trying to get to the city before this MSF attack actually happened to cover the fight for the city, and that involved first of all going to the Ministry of Defence and getting embed papers signed, and so that's a lot of very kind of arduous bureaucratic paperwork involved in that. So myself and a colleague had a local colleague who was doing all that, working out all the paperwork, getting things signed, coming back to getting our signature and sending it back, and that eventually came through. So we had our papers, and we got it was impossible to get there by road because the roads were cut off, and obviously no flights into Kunduz at the time. So we got a commercial flight to a neighbouring city where we thought we might be able to get a ride in on a military convoy or by helicopter. We ended up waiting a day and a half or 2 days on the helicopter landing pad there. As helicopters came in and out, bringing back soldiers' bodies and taking out food and ammunition. And eventually there was enough room on one of the helicopters to let us on. And they dropped us into the military base, which is about 5 k's out of the city. And we got there and we were pretty much marooned in there. No one wanted to take us out. The public affairs officer there was very conservative about what he wanted us to see. So we really, every day it was a uphill battle we'd go and knock on this guy's door and say, can you take us out today? Can you take us out today? He'd say no, and then we'd knock on another door, and everyone would say, tomorrow 100%. And it's like Groundhog Day in the end. So on this day, it was we basically talked our way into a convoy. A sort of sympathetic officer said, "Jump in," and luckily we had all our equipment with us at the time, and we literally just jumped on the back of his trucks, and that was the footage that we saw of them trying to kind of corral the remaining Taliban into a spot where they could round them up and either kill them or capture them. And then from there, that was as close to the city as I'd got. So it was at that point that I was in contact with MSF in Kabul, and we were trying to work out a way that I could get to the hospital because obviously they wanted me to get there as well. And so between Kabul and myself, they organised a local driver to come and collect me from inside the city, picked me up and took me away from the soldiers, and I sort of went from protective gear to undercover, and we drove in a unmarked little Corolla into the city, and
it's quite an effort, isn't it?
It's all quite close, yeah.
Yeah.
And then obviously I had no idea what I'd find in there, and but the reason I went to such lengths was because no journalists had managed to get in there yet, and there were no photos or footage or testimony from inside the hospital and what had happened, and how many people had been killed and the extent of the damage to the hospital.
And how did you come across this?
This was right at the end of the time I'd spent in there. It was I mean, there was fighting going on pretty close to the hospital, and it was increasing, and the light was getting lower, and I kind of just wanted to get out of there. But it was so the damage was so vast that I was just trying to go from room to room, and I was really standing in the middle of every room and going click, 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 and trying to document every, almost forensically. And then before I left, I almost didn't walk into this part of the hospital because it hadn't been nearly as damaged as everywhere else, which had been incinerated. But I, walked into a couple of the operating theatres, and it was very dark, a lot darker than it appears here. So it took a second for my eyes to adjust, and then obviously walked in on that. And I'd already come across like 9 or 10 bodies, but they were all very disfigured. And this was kind of harder to see because it was such a, intact and so human and so vulnerable. So
what went through your mind when you saw that, this man?
I think I probably swore to myself and then kind of took a deep breath and tried to move around and work as quickly as I could.
So you're in professional mode, this is my job, because there's an emotional toll in working in places where you see things like this. This could be the stuff of your nightmares. So how do you protect yourself when you're doing this sort of work?
Well, what can you do in that situation? You can't walk out or, turn your camera off, or, you can, but I'm very much just in professional mode, and doing what I'm there to be doing, and trying to think about my surrounds, with the fighting going on. I was trying to just work quickly, to be honest, and get out of there, but with a good job done.
This was the iconic photo, obviously, of that shoot. Was there any resistance to publishing it?
Yeah, there was. MSF were very resistant in the beginning.
Why?
I think probably a few reasons. One, I think they were probably concerned about what would be said after a number of these bodies had been left in the hospital a week after. I don't hold anything against MSF. It was pretty extreme circumstances, but particularly in an Islamic country where burial within 24 hours is very important. Also, they were worried about their local staff, there might have been some backlash against them for, I don't know, maybe being perceived to have abandoned the hospital.
That's right.
Or have
disrespect.
Yeah, something like that. But a number of reasons. And also obviously for the family itself. They wanted to find the family, and they wanted to get the family's approval before this was published, which technically, even like in a professional ethics way, is not mandatory. Morally,
absolutely.
Maybe it is. You could argue that.
Absolutely. Because you have to work quickly.
Exactly, yeah. But in the end, we kind of...
Let's have a look at the photo of the family, which was amazing that you took that as well, of the wife and child at the gravesite.
In the end, we Foreign Policy, who had sent me there, who had commissioned me, and myself and MSF all agreed that we would hold off. But we asked them that they would help us to track down the family, and so that enabled us to not only publish the picture, but to give a lot of the background and tell the story about his family and how he had ended up on the operating table and what was left for his family.
How important is that photo for you to complement the one before?
Very. For me, this scenes like this and meeting his family, and to this day, are much harder than that graphic sight in the hospital. Seeing his little daughters, and particularly here, this was a month later, and he's really beautiful little children. He had a 6-year-old, a 8-year-old, a 10-year-old, and a 18-year-old, and this was the 8-year-old Zara, and her mother, obviously, and they're all, they're just a poor family. The children are all going to school. They're very bright young kids who are all, what do you say, without their father now.
It's also important, I think, when we watch footage of Afghanistan on television and we think, oh no, not again, not again, and here you are, you've given a face, a family, the grief, and we feel much more. So what is the power of a photograph to you? I mean, we can also have a look at some of the other photographs that you've taken. What do you look for, and what do you hope these photographs do to the public who is seeing them?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I guess the ultimate hope is that, there's some redress for what happened there, but none of that's happened. I mean, these photos haven't changed anything.
I mean, this is interesting, What can you tell us about?
That was, these are displaced people camping on the side of a road in another provincial capital. This was the morning of my 32nd birthday, I think, at about like 5 a.m. in the morning, and it was like -10 degrees, and these guys are all living, there's about 300 families living in donated tents you can see in the background, and but what do I aim to accomplish? I mean...
Do you think these photos do have power? Have power in the West? I mean, do they have power when they're published in Western journals?
Hope so. It's not for me to determine that, I guess, but I hope so. I mean, I think I find them to be powerful scenes, and I suppose, my hope is that I can convert those powerful scenes into images that strike a chord somehow.
So what do you look for? What is an iconic photograph? Is there a formula?
I mean, I think there's, all the technical qualities like, exposure and focus and all these things, composition that
Symbolism.
Yeah, I mean, they're, I think by the time you're a professional photographer, they're a given that you know how to accomplish these things. There's something above that you can't necessarily put your finger on or train for or train someone else for, like, some sort of X factor that gives a picture, an atmosphere or a mood that almost transcends the scene itself. It's like you're trying to draw more power and atmosphere out of a scene than the scene itself actually holds.
We remember throughout history those powerful photographs, the execution of the South Vietnamese soldier, the children running away from...
napalm.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, and yours could possibly be part of that long tradition. Do you think that if you go back to what you used to do before and also a lot of the legacy media, do you think the photograph has been undervalued?
You mean the photograph?
The photographs, the photographer's job in the media and legacy media, because a lot of your people you worked with, your colleagues, have lost their jobs in newspapers.
Mm-hmm. Undervalued. I mean, it's probably
not appreciated as much.
Well, perhaps. I mean, I think photographers in the newsroom, for example, are kind of considered, especially in Australia. I noticed that they're like a kind of subordinate to the writers. In my case, in print media, and maybe that goes for cameramen in TV news and documentaries. But I think I've noticed since I've started working for American and particularly American media, the photography is given a lot more value. That doesn't mean it's is remunerated
Paid well.
paid well accordingly. Like rates for photography haven't changed, certainly not since I've been working, and I think probably as far back as the 80s or 90s. And there's not as many pages these days to fill.
That iconic photograph you used to get on the front page that just said everything, that didn't actually need a lot of words because it was obvious. Do you think that is less common now in Australia when you come back and you flick through the newspapers?
Definitely. Yeah, I think it's pretty sad looking at the newspapers these days. I mean, when I was getting into photography in the early 2000s, the people around me at the time, where I was sort of earning my, learning the trade at Fairfax at the Sydney Morning Herald, the photographers there were incredible and very inspiring, and they were winning all these international awards, and they were great mentors. There's about a quarter the number now at the Sydney Morning Herald, for example.
Where have they gone?
Some of them are freelancing, others have gone off and doing more commercial work, but there's certainly not the jobs out there for photographers, especially in Australia, and then overseas, it feels like photography in a way has become more popular with the likes of Instagram and just camera phones and things. It's become...
Give your photos away for free.
Yeah, there is that. And I think everyone a lot of professionals were worried that would happen. I don't think it has. I think maybe the images have been devalued somewhat by, iStock and Getty, where, you can buy photos for $1 or whatever it is. And, generally bringing the value of the image down. But, I mean, I think at the end of the day, a good photo is still a good photo, and if you're not a good photographer, you're not going to get that unless on those very rare occasions where, in incidents of like, for example, the Paris, terror attacks, or Istanbul, or wherever it is, where people on the spot, on those extreme news moments, are able to do it. But at the end of the day, most of the pictures you will see are still going to be captured by professionals, and certainly in a place like Afghanistan.
So, Andrew, what you're doing and what a lot of the frontline photographers, camera people and journalists are doing, we say it's the first draft of history, and you're recording the evidence that it actually happened. So in the time that you've been in Afghanistan, you must have developed some insights in, you've recorded the rise of Islamic State, the changes in Afghanistan from a political point of view, and what insights have you gathered? I mean, are you optimistic about or pessimistic about Afghanistan? What does the future hold for it?
Yeah, I think it's definitely going to go downhill before it goes up or before it plateaus. I mean, it's a bit of a stalemate there at the moment. The Taliban are gaining more territory and momentum and confidence, but the reality is that they're probably not going to overrun Kabul, and they might overrun a few other cities like Kunduz, but they won't be able to hold them for any length of time, because while the Americans are there, they can bomb them from the air, and they just don't have the resources that the Afghans, supported by the likes of the US, have. So it's really going to grind on, I think, for the foreseeable future. There's been some not nominal attempts, but big efforts made towards peace talks, but they've all floundered, and they all hinge on Pakistan, really, who, it's like the worst kept secret that they
Still the puppeteers.
aid and abet the Taliban. I mean, the Taliban are all living there. All the leaders are there, and the suicide bombers are generally trained up there and come across the border to do their attacks. So, without a big concessions from Pakistan, it's going to drag on.
So, how long are you going to stay there? What's next for you?
I don't know. I mean, I've been there 3 years now, and I'll probably think about making an exit sometime later this year, but I don't have a
no plan. Is there anything that you would like to do next?
I mean, I'm quite happy in Afghanistan, to be honest, and I still love working there, and I'd happily continue, just doing what I've been doing there. But I think, like professionally and maybe mentally, it's probably a good thing to keep moving, and professionally, so I'm not sort of pigeonholed as like an Afghanistan guy, or so I don't, when I eventually do leave.
But will you still be a frontline guy, or are you going to try and move somewhere else?
I think I'd probably move somewhere where I can have a bit more of a normal lifestyle outside of work. But, I think that's one of the things I really love about living in Kabul. I can, walk out my door in the morning and I can take a picture, and it's relevant to this sort of greater body of work that I'm putting together. If, there's not that many places in the world where that is possible. I mean, there are, but I guess it's whether I want to, keep working at that kind of intensity, or whether to go somewhere that's, there's like a more cosmopolitan capital, but there's stuff going on the fringes, or in the neighbouring countries.
Well, okay. I think we'll open it up to the audience now. See if there's some questions from the audience.
Andrew, the photograph, your iconic photograph that you saw there, there was some dignity on that body there? You saw it as that. Do you think that was actually just it was someone had come there to give him some dignity?
That was actually, I wasn't sure. That's what I had thought when I first saw it. But when I spoke to 3 surgeons who were working on him, and they said that was one of the first things that had happened when the bombing in the other part of the hospital happened. It shook the roof, and this ceiling panel fell down and fell straight on him. So yeah, that's how that happened. But I guess it does give him a bit of dignity.
I've got a question about the domestic press in Afghanistan and what's happened with them over the 3 years that you've been there, how you work with them, whether you see the foreign press having a role in building their capacity to tell their own stories going into the future.
Yeah, there definitely is. There's a lot of organisations who are helping with that sort of capacity building, as they call it there. But there's also there was so much money thrown into media in the post 2001 years that now there is this total glut of media organisations and not much money to fund them. So you'll go to a press conference in Kabul for some low-ranking Interior Ministry official, and there'll be 20 cameras there, 20 video cameras on tripods, and it's it's quite indicative of the situation there, where you've got all these relatively well trained and once well resourced journalists there, but the jobs are really fading and the funding for those organisations are fading. So a lot of them are trying to work out ways to stand on their own feet, much like the country itself. There's definitely a lot of organisations that help with the capacity building, and but it's a very new country and a new industry. I mean, basically it was a non-functioning country until 2001. I mean, the 5 years of Taliban was just, everything was just stripped from culture, and people were dumbed down over those 5 years and learning from scratch after 2001. So there's still, it's still a very young industry, and the quality is, there's exceptions, but it's still, they have a lot of work to do. But there's a lot of journalists there who are, extremely passionate, and any journalist that is still working there and hasn't tried to flee and leave for Europe or anyone else is a committed human being, that's for sure. Yeah.
Yes.
Hey, I'm just wondering how you find the kind of the reverse culture shock coming back to places like Australia after you've been living in Afghanistan for all those years?
I don't suffer from it, I have to say. I haven't yet. And I don't know why, or, I mean, I don't know. I grew up here. I kind of know what to expect when I come back, and you know, I guess I see it through a slightly different filter, but it doesn't. I don't feel angry or you know, about what we have versus what they don't have in Afghanistan. So, but I don't know what the reason for that is and why some people feel it and others don't. I think, you know, what I see in comparison to what Australian soldiers, for example, saw is hugely different. Not only in terms of what they saw as, you know, in terms of graphic, you know, what comes of, you know, war, but also, you know, what I see in terms of, you know, relating to Afghans, which the military got, you know, much less opportunity to do. So I get to see a lot of the good side of Afghanistan, whereas Australian soldiers that were there were, you know, walking around with targets on their back and, you know, fearing, you know, almost every Afghan they saw. And I think, and I would imagine that has something to do with why a lot of soldiers come back and, you know, suffering from post-traumatic stress and the like.
Did you build up a rapport with your subject matter, with the people? So, like, you're able to put them at ease, taking their photo and understanding their different struggles and that sort of thing?
It depends. I mean, it depends, yeah, on the photo. I mean, obviously with these guys, I didn't even speak to them. These guys, on the other hand, yeah, I sat down and like had a cup of tea with them, and you know, I mean, my language skills are terrible, but I kind of, you know, worked out, you know, with the tiny bit of English they knew and the little Dari I knew, that where they were from and how long they'd been there and how many kids they had and so on. This is another one, you know, a fleeting moment and seconds later they're gone. Here, I mean, that was obviously a very sort of sensitive moment, and I mean, the hard thing to grasp for us in this instance is it's not her permission that I need, it's the man. So probably the oldest man in this family. So I went and spoke to him and you know, told him what I was doing, and did he mind if I, you know, stayed and took some pictures. But at the same time, you know, it's not hard to work out whether someone is happy having their picture taken, and if I get the smallest inkling that that's the case, whether it's just you know, whether one of these women gives me a look like, get out of here, you know, I take heed.
I noticed that they're exposed their faces, they're not wearing the burqas, so does that mean things have eased a bit for women?
Well, certainly since Taliban times. I mean, they'd all be actually they wouldn't even be out in public like that during Taliban times. But yeah, no, it's certainly not mandatory it's not, you know, there's no legal standing of the burqa. But yeah, certainly the headscarf. So, I mean, in a sense, yeah. I mean, things have definitely changed for the better. It's just that they've kind of peaked and maybe they're on the decline again.
Are you sometimes scared?
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, I am, but it's also times when I'm scared. It's also can be very exciting, I think, and because when I'm scared, I'm usually working, so I try and let the adrenaline override the fear and use that to keep working, rather than being having so much fear that I can't work physically. But that, I mean, I've had friends who have been in situations where they just freeze, like they're too close to whatever it is they're photographing, and in those situations they've just left because they can no longer work, and there's no point in them at that point, there's no point in them being there, so they get out. I haven't experienced that yet.
Do you have friends who suffer from post-traumatic stress because of what they've seen? And that could also happen to you. Sometimes it happens years later.
Yeah, I think my generation of journalists are a lot more aware of that kind of thing nowadays than perhaps we were 10 or 20 years ago, and look out for the warning signs and are very supportive in back in the sort of social environment in Kabul. So that I think that makes a big difference. But did I answer the question?
Post-traumatic stress,
yeah.
Sebastian Junger wrote about this. And it hit him in the New York subway.
That's right, yeah.
So you could be down here at Central Station and
true,
it might hit you one day.
And that's the other thing. Guys like Sebastian Junger have been doing this for decades. I've been doing it for, 3 years. So, yeah.
Okay. Yes?
Has it got any recognition in Afghanistan, or has it been an impact locally?
Yeah, good question. Very little of my work is published in Afghanistan. However, obviously online these days it's visible almost anywhere. So I think, it's hard for me to gauge. I think certainly within the educated elite, especially in Kabul, who are interested in what's going on around the country and in the media's portrayal of it. I think yes, definitely. And I think nowadays, after so much of the media has left, I get a feeling of most Afghans are grateful for those that are still there from outside the country and still interested in the country and trying to give it, a little bit of the spotlight on the world stage still. But no, I haven't done any work for Afghan organisations really. But I do work alongside a lot of Afghans, obviously, and they're very. It's good. It can work well. Like where I have more professional experience, they obviously have, the language for one, and knowing the social terrain and the where to go and where not to go. So I have a lot of good relationships with Afghan journalists. I will always work with a local Afghan journalist, depending which city I go to outside Kabul, and it's all. I always enjoy that and make good friends. And I think that a lot of those local journalists, working in the provincial capitals are also, they like working with foreigners for the most part. I think they have a very hard job because where I can come and go from Helmand or Kunduz, they're stuck there for the most part and have to work. And if they're driving me around the city in Kunduz and, everyone's seeing this, local journalists with a foreigner, it's bad news for them. I think there's a big percentage of the population there that probably thinks, or whose first thought is that I'm a spy, or, I'm working for the US or whoever it is, that I have some sort of nefarious mission. And so, local journalists will definitely raise some eyebrows when they're seen with me. So it's very tough.
More accessibility in terms of getting to where you go to the photograph. Obviously, there is in the language that you might have contacts or you have foreign countries. Publishers send you in different sort of places. In that way, you sort of in a better place than the photographer.
I think yes and no. I think it can be. There's obviously places that I can't go that a local journalist can. Some local journalists are able to go into Taliban territory, whereas it would be stupidly risky for me to do that. And not because I value my life more than I value theirs, but because they are Afghan and because there would be some greater level of trust, there would be...
Would they be pro-Taliban or not necessarily?
Well, hopefully they're neutral, but I mean there would be a lot of pressure on them from the Taliban to present in a positive light.
Or else?
Or else, yeah. But yeah, they're not. I mean, the Taliban's certainly not very media savvy. I mean, I think they could they could show someone like myself into a place where they're allowing girls to go to school, which they do in some cases. Mm-hmm. And imagine the world saw that. I mean, it'd be like no one knows that story.
Maybe that's your next assignment.
Wow, what's so bad about the Taliban after all? And I mean, people have tried, and it's.
Are you going to try it?
Well, it's one of my huge frustrations that I can only photograph one side of the war, and it's very different. I mean, it's the way of warfare these days, especially in Afghanistan and across the Middle East, where once you could cross front lines and cover both sides of the conflict, and even in the civil war in Afghanistan, you could cross the front lines and cover one side of the conflict in the morning and the other in the afternoon. And nowadays it's just, particularly with Islamic State and the Taliban and the like, it's just not doable. Mm.
So we probably have time for a couple more. Yes?
Can you tell us more about the photo of the girl underneath the red scarf?
It's a little boy actually, but that was in coincidentally another MSF hospital. He's suffering from severe acute malnutrition, and this was in a ward that treats that. And there's the statistics of malnutrition are just staggering. It's something like, I think, a quarter of the population, the youth population, suffers from severe malnutrition there, and it has a lot to do with, I guess, education. That families who don't have regular access to hospitals and health facilities might not breastfeed their children. Instead, they would feed them tea or biscuits or sugary tea. All the sort of things that don't give a young child the nutrients they need. It can be very hard photographing in hospitals because it's a hospital. Like it can be chaotic in an emergency room, but you go into the wards and it's a lot of very sick people lying in beds, and so it takes a lot of patience. On this occasion, I had the day to photograph in this ward, so one room and about a dozen patients, and all young children with their mothers mostly. And so I'd probably been there for a couple of hours before I took this, and hadn't even taken a picture maybe by that stage. And I saw the mother cover him. Gul Ahmed was his name, and is his name, and I sort of walked over to her slowly and purported that I wanted to take his picture, and is it okay? And straight away she removed the scarf, and I was like, oh, no. So I just sort of stepped back, and because she'd done that to keep the flies off him or to keep the light off him, and so I always try to influence the scene as little as I possibly can. So for one thing, it wasn't the picture that I had seen, and secondly, I kind of disturbed the scene. So I sort of backed back and just said, sorry to interrupt, and then she eventually put the scarf back down, and I asked one of the nurses to explain to her that, or ask if it was okay to take the picture and just to leave him as he was, and obviously it's very, I'm standing over the top of him. It's quite a sort of threatening, I would have been quite a threatening presence. So I just tried to, I just worked as quickly as I could. I took, maybe a dozen pictures and backed off, and yeah.
Yes?
Andy, how do you rate the importance of the camera phone in your work, and is it a distraction or an asset?
Probably a bit of both. I mean, I've definitely taken pictures on my phone that I wished I'd taken on my camera because the image quality is so much better. But I guess it's a trade-off. I use the camera phone specifically for Instagram, and I think the following that I've been able to generate primarily from the work from Afghanistan via Instagram has been worth making that compromise. I think like Instagram has become kind of a very viable media tool nowadays, where you can have as many, you can have a following that's greater than the readership of, some magazines. So I think it's hard to ignore that. I mean, the difficulty is getting paid from it, I guess.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So yes, down the front.
Andrew, how do you manage the range of food and that in Kabul? If you day-to-day life, is it quite limited? Because in all of those countries, the produce is very limited. What do you buy? How do you get by?
Oh, it's not too bad at all, really. I mean, the fresh produce out of Afghanistan is amazing, and cheap, of course. And so I cook at home myself, and I mean for the Western staples like breakfast cereal and pasta and things. There's a few kind of Western style supermarkets that I can get to. Yeah.
Okay. Yes.
Just a quick one. I understand you're still with Ocular.
I'm not actually.
You're not? Okay. Do you, as far as agencies goes, how does that fit? Do you have one here or?
Well, I was affiliated with Oculii, which is a Australian-based collective that's been around for about 15 years. But I left there when my work was obviously veering out of Australia. I have a couple of agencies, one in Europe and one in the States. But it's a pretty tough model, like a kind of business model these days, and I don't really get a lot of work from them at all, and they take a huge cut, which makes it almost not worth even taking on the assignments. So I'm actually kind of weighing it all up at the moment. I think it's so much easier nowadays to do all the communication yourself, whereas once upon a time, pre-internet, pre-email, pre-Skype, it was harder for people to find you and vice versa, whereas now it's, I'm an email away from anywhere in the world. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Andrew. It's been wonderful to talk to you. Great to meet you. Congratulations on your body of work, and we'll be watching for whatever else you do, and stay safe. And thanks everyone, and come to the Claire and ask some more questions.
Thanks
Thank
for
you.
coming.